Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Welch, your host of the Winning at Weight Loss 2.0 online series, and I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Sam Shea with us today. Hello, and thank you for being
Hi,
with us.
I'm
Hi
I'm very
there.
happy to be here.
We're
I love being on summits.
great. We're so lucky to have you. You have some new information for me, so I'm very excited to hear. And you're starting the summit off because your talk today is really an overview of 10 different types of weight loss. So I think it will set us up perfectly for all the speakers to come. So I'm super excited that you thought of that. But Dr. Sam Shea is super qualified. He's a doctor of chiropractic medicine, and he helps busy, health conscious entrepreneurs attain and sustain high performance so that they can create more freedom for themselves and for others. He has dedicated his life to helping others through functional medicine and functional genetics. Dr. Shea walked down his own health journey from being chronically unwell from 6 to the age of 18, including severe fatigue, anxiety, digestive problems, chronic pain, severe insomnia, and poor nutrition. He dedicated his life to natural medicine to get himself and others well, which led him to functional medicine and functional testing. So it sounds like a tough childhood with all those problems. Yeah. So he created the 10 pillar method to properly assess the most important and most commonly missed components of health and wellness. Too many well meaning people chase the latest hack or trick. Yeah, I was one of them, or supplement or gadget,
You too.
yet never fully grasp the 30,000-foot view using the lens of the 10 pillars of health. To learn even more, we're going to get his free book, Biohacking, your Biohacking ebook, so he can tell us more about it. So, welcome, Dr. Shea. So happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you. And I just a couple other kind of relevant details. I'm not just a DC, but I'm also a certified practitioner for the Institute for Functional Medicine, as well as a certified practitioner of the Kalish Institute for Functional Medicine. So what I've done is had a very long circuitous arc in touching on multiple different fields of natural health. I even degree in acupuncture. I used to have a fellowship and postgraduate diploma in neurology. I gave both those up when I went into 100% virtual practice over 3 years ago, before virtual was fashionable, current pandemic. And so I'm sharing that background is that there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of diverse bits of input that have come to this roadmap of the 10 different types of weight loss. And it's not just, people might think, oh, he's a chiropractor. I'm not saying get adjusted to lose weight. That's not what I'm saying. It's actually a giant field drawing from Chinese medicine, from functional neurology, from Institute of Functional Medicine, from also 20 years of studying naturopathic nutrition. Actually ran an organic kitchen co-op back in college. All sorts of different inputs that have synergized into a meaningful roadmap that I'd love to share with your audience, particularly at the very, very beginning of the summit. And I am known for leading off summits because what happens in summits is that people get overwhelmed with so many different viewpoints that all sound and are really amazing and logical, and yet it's usually just like one particular pathway. And at the end of a summit, or even the middle of a summit, people can feel, oh my God, what road do I pick? Because they all sound so convincing and they all sound so legitimate. And the reality is not every road is for everybody, but every road does help the people that it can help. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't always help to the degree for the people that the road is not designed for. So my goal is to, here are the 10 major paths for weight loss. Here are the 10 major functional tests that you will hear about, so that it's not the first time you'll hear it when you come to someone's individual pathway. So then you can look at everything and be able to contextualize every bit of information you will learn on this summit into its proper place. And you'll have the roadmap right in front of you.
Yeah, that's great. And definitely, I fell into the camp of overwhelm. And sometimes you can read contradictory information and then you just leave very puzzled. And it's like, well, I'll never figure it out. But just like driving somewhere, you can take multiple roads to get to the same destination. So
Absolutely.
I think I've probably used a blend of a lot of different strategies to get my results of releasing 85 pounds or so. And I've learned things along the way. So I love that you have such a diverse background, because I think we can learn a lot. You know, I'm coming sort of from the medical model, but definitely there's a functional medicine piece that really helped me. And so, you know, you don't really know what you don't know till you start diving into. So I think people should just have an open mind and absorb all the different information and take lots of notes. But I'd love to know, how did you get started out in weight loss?
So I got started in weight loss kind of indirectly. My particular, I had some very particular clients and patients that were, the more they exercised, the fatter they got, which, you know, when we talk about demoralizing, let's talk about that. And these were people that just two men in particular and one woman in particular stood out. In fact, I presented at a genetics conference on using them as case studies on the now we'll talk about genetics at another segment. But what I saw was that when I analyzed them, these gentlemen were large, and the more they exercised, the fatter they got, plus the more pain they were in, plus they both had man boobs. Now, I don't have some bizarre fixation on man boobs. It's just that I was in a physical practice and they were standing in front of me, and I'm just observant, and as I'm supposed to be as a clinician. And I thought, I wonder if they're over-inflaming and they have estrogen dominance. So the more they exercise, they overshoot some tipping point where they've exercised too much to create a net gain of inflammation, which creates inflammatory water weight. And then the estrogen dominance will then will position the weight in certain parts of the body, like on the chest, because that, you know, estrogen creates bigger mass on the chest. So I ran their genetics and also analyzed their lifestyle in detail. With the lifestyle bit, and you will see this particular presentation. And what I saw was that they had lifestyle issues that were exposing them to exogenous or external estrogens, plus other lifestyle things that were provoking inflammation. And when I analyzed their genetics, they were massively pro-inflammatory, and they have issues with their estrogen detox pathways, but their calorie fat burning was fantastic. So the weight they carried wasn't calories. The weight they carried was inflammatory water weight redistributed by toxic hormonal weight. So it wasn't the calorie issue. So the more they exercised, the more they created more inflammatory weight. So what I did was I changed their lifestyle, changed their diet, put them on an anti-inflammatory, liver supporting protocol. And one guy lost over 20 kg. This is when I was living in New Zealand. It's over 20 kg for Americans. That's over 40 pounds in 1 month, wow. Including all the weight off of his extra weight off his chest with the man boobs. The other gentleman was a bit more obstinate and only did part of what I was recommending, but he still did part of it. And he lost 1 kg a week consistently for 16 weeks. Sorry, 16 or 14 weeks. Anyway, a long time, but consistently. And his belly fat went away. The chest, the extra weight on his chest went away. His other hormones balanced. He had some other issues. We did some other functional tests that resolved themselves. And but it wasn't from exercising more and eating less. It was from adapting to their unique situation using detailed analysis and testing, genetics, functional, etc., to customize what their body needed to drop a release, you know, whatever the term is nowadays, you know, to have more normalized, balanced weight. And then with the female patient, what happened was that she had gone, it was very similar, except she had gone to see some CrossFit enthusiast trainer who, you can tell by my sigh, I'm not a big fan of. The joke when I was in physical practice, the joke with chiropractors, if you didn't like a patient, you sent them to CrossFit till they got injured and then sent them off to another chiropractor you didn't like. So I don't agree with the super high intensity, go as much as hard as you can, because with this client, for example, very quickly she started to gain weight and lose muscle definition, and her cycles went off. And she constantly, what's going on? And I checked her genetics, and she had a near identical profile genetically in terms of the inflammatory markers and the difficulty clearing estrogen. Her fat burning was fine. What happened was that she was over exercising, creating more inflammation, retaining all the water weight, and the estrogen was building up because her liver was overwhelmed with all the inflammation that she was generating. But instead of the weight going to her chest, what happens is her cycles went off. So she had weight gain plus dysmenorrhea. She had weight gain, just terrible hormonal issues that she used to be like clockwork, and then just all over the place and very other and problematic, embarrassing symptoms. And so similarly, when I checked her genetics, same, almost the same, not identical, but almost the same genre. And similar, not identical, similar process of identifying the sources of estrogen, inflammation, reducing the exercise down to twice a week with at least a day or two in between for rest, changed pro-liver detox, anti-inflammatory diet, lifestyle, etc. Her weight normalized, her cycles normalized. That's how I really got into it, was through genetics and functional testing, and looking at the standard more exercise, starve yourself approach was backfiring.
Right. When you're getting such great results with people just, that are doing all the things, really. I think for those that are exercising a lot, it's very frustrating when they're not getting results and they feel like they're eating well. So when you're able to
demoralizing.
Demoralizing.
People can be suicidal. I'm not being hyperbolic. People can be suicidal over this. It's like, I've tried everything and I'm getting worse.
Right. And so that's so great. And you help them slim down. And then now it's great that you're sharing this info with us. You discovered 10 different types of weight loss. How did you figure that out, or what are they?
So, what I'll do is I'll share my screen here, and it will I think it'll help clarify a great deal of what I'm trying to share.
Great.
So this is the 10 pillars of health, and the 10 pillars where I developed back in 2011, I believe. And so it's been about 10 years. And the 10 pillars came about through very detailed historical case history analysis, and lots and lots of reading and studying, and figuring out that when I was working with clients that were struggling with things that were not with chronic issues, and I also reflect on my own life with my own meaningful formative period where I was struggling with so many things all at once. What I realized is that there were 10 different categories, and that the people who were struggling had a minimum of 7 out of 10 pillars crumbling to one degree or another. And this is why when they were going to one clinician or one protocol or one set of products, they weren't getting any meaningful sustained results, because most practitioners, products, protocols deal with 1 to 3 pillars really well. But if you got 7 that are crumbling, you're really not going to get long-lasting, meaningful results. So it's like sitting on 7 tacks. You can remove 1 to 3 of them. Technically, you're healthier because there's fewer tacks you're sitting on. But do you feel any better? And are you fully better? The answer is no. So, but the 7 pillars, which 7 plus pillars were different for each different person. And this is why I went down the magic bullet therapy route myself, trying this, this goji berry juice I squirt up my nose, this magic light illuminating meditation technique, this, bizarre yoga posture, whatever it was. And I realized that I had all 10 out of 10 pillars crumbling during that pillar. At lucky me. So doing one particular thing wasn't working, even though the people who were conveying and or selling to me their one thing, that it was worked for them, so it should work for you. And if it doesn't work, well, you just have to do more of that one thing. Or if it doesn't, then the flip, it's just all in your head. You're self-sabotaging because you're an emotional bloke, because my special goji berry juice should work on everybody. And if it doesn't, it's their fault. And I've had that happen to me, not just, I'm using, the nasal insufflated goji juice is kind of the comic illustration of a very common phenomenon across whatever domain of natural health. It's it's this kind of like natural health guilt tripping that if this magic thing doesn't work for you, then it's your fault because it worked for me. And it can borderline a bit kind of abusive a little bit. Like, and what I realized was that it did work for them, but they just had that one pillar or two that particular thing applied to, that, and for their situation, it brought their pillar from like 30% up to like 80%, and the rest of the pillars were pretty much fine. So that's when they had their quote miracle experience. But for the rest of us, humans that had multiple pillars that were crumbling, it only helped repair part of the house. There's still massive exposures in the rest of it. So it was through this model, I was able to actually go back to these other magical therapies and see their redeeming value, as long as they were used in the proper context, synergistically with everything else the person needed. Great. So the people's magical therapies were legit, and you could still use them, just use them appropriately with everything else.
Right. Well, I love that you got all the categories to start with the letter B, first of all.
They're all B. I'm a bit of a teaching nerd like that. So so the first, let me provide just a tiny bit more context, and we'll go through all of them in detail.
Great.
So just who I help, the main people I work with are busy, health conscious entrepreneurs who want to obtain and sustain high performance so they can create more freedom for themselves and others. I'm all about helping improve freedom. And I believe health conscious entrepreneurs are the people I can uniquely help to scale, creating more freedom for everyone. Now, we already talked about the challenges that people can have around weight. And there's one particular illustrative example I love to use is the muffin. So people listening, I'm sure you have experienced or seen, because people eat this one tiny little muffin, and you gain 3 pounds that day from that one little muffin. Now, unless that muffin was last year's regifted Christmas fruitcake, it didn't weigh 3 pounds, right? Mm-hmm. So what happened was that the inflammatory nature of that muffin, whether it's the gluten in it or the sugars or the dough conditioners or whatever it was, the inflammation triggered the body to retain water to dilute the toxic inflammatory chemicals from damaging the cells and tissues. And so the body retains water, you swell up with water in order to buy the liver and kidneys time to filter them out. That's the rapid swelling of weight and also the rapid reduction of weight when you get off these inflammatory foods. So, and like we talk about the exercise, like if you exercise too much, you can trigger inflammation too much. And it's the same phenomenon. You retain water to dilute the toxic inflammatory chemicals to buy the liver and kidneys time to filter them out. That's the basic mechanism. So people, just as a visual, people want more detailed information. I've got a whole ebook on this, a long form, where I go through each of the 10 pillars in much more detail than the time constraints we have here. But it's in the ebook. It's drsamshay.com/biohacker, or you just go to my core website. You'll see the ability to opt in there. And then here's the 10 pillars. Now, the 10 pillars are, number one, at the core is the brain and hormones. So that's thyroid, that's adrenals, thyroid, sex hormones. We already talked about sex hormones and estrogen dominance. Cortisol, the adrenals, if they're overloaded or overtaxed, you can get what's called adrenal weight, where you have chronic cortisol elevation, the stress hormone, and then it puts weight around the trunk. And the reason why is anthropological, that as hunter-gatherers, there were 2 main causes of chronic stress. Everything else was acute stress. There's a forest fire, there's a bear running at you, there's a giant windstorm, whatever. The 2 sources of chronic stress were the threat of starvation and a warring tribe next to you. Okay, so what happens is under chronic stress, you put weight around your trunk, around your core, which does what? It frees up your extremities and your hips and shoulders to sprint, to run for your life, and also to walk long distances. Sumos are huge, but they're very quick over short distances. Okay, they can still, boom, move very fast. And so obviously we weren't sumos in the savannah, but you get the point that if you have a lot of weight around your belly, you can still walk away walk for miles and miles and miles to either forage for food that's farther away, or literally walk down your prey, because quadrupeds fatigue faster than bipedals. It's one of the 12 arguments of how hominid bipedalism developed. What happened, you can also walk away from the warring tribe, and you can also still sprint either after your food or away from something trying to kill you. So stress deposits your fat around your belly to save your life. Even though it's an evolutionary holdover. Today we're not sprinting away from saber-toothed tigers. We're just, dealing with, the latest alarmist news thing that's on.
Right.
So then there's thyroid, and thyroid has a different weight distribution. It's kind of all over the body. Thyroid is the missing half of thyroid that people don't realize. There's 4 connected to functional medicine. With the thyroid, there's 4 dyads. There's thyroid, adrenal. So if the adrenals are overactive, it will shut down the thyroid, because adrenals are about short-term survival. Thyroid's about long-term health, longevity, growth, repair. If you're under stress, acute or chronic, it will shut down the thyroid. So that's one dyad. People have thyroid issues, they need to look at their adrenals. The other thing to look at is if there's an autoimmune issue or antibodies to the thyroid. The gluten can create antibodies. 3 specific types of infections have been shown to trigger autoimmunity in the thyroid through what's called intestinal permeability, or quote, leaky gut. We've been calling it leaky gut for decades, but the big pharma didn't want to acknowledge we were right, so they renamed it intestinal permeability to make it sound more medical, but we were right. It was called leaky gut the whole time. So there's the gut thyroid connection, that if you repair the gut, you can slow or stop the autoimmunity reaction to the thyroid, that triggers whether it's Hashimoto's or otherwise. So there's a gut thyroid dyad. Then there's the thyroid mitochondria dyad. And people think of thyroid as, it's my basal metabolic rate. Basal metabolic rate. Everyone says that. No one knows what the hell it means. Pardon my language. Okay. I mean, you've heard that, basal metabolic rate. Okay, so what does that mean? What it means is that it's the rate at which your mitochondria are burning proteins, fats, and carbs for energy. So what happens is that T4 from the thyroid becomes T3 in the mitochondria, and the T3 is a little engineer that turns on the furnace known as the mitochondria to burn fat, to burn fuel. So the basal metabolic rate is really your mitochondria. The business end of the thyroid is the mitochondria. So there's the mitochondria thyroid dyad. And then there's the thyroid estrogen dyad. If you have too much estrogen, it can interfere with thyroid. That's why most thyroid issues are in females. Now, there's also another dyad of liver and thyroid, where if you have toxic elements like mercury that suck up all the selenium, and then the selenium you need to help deal with, make the thyroid work properly and all the rest of it. And I'm mentioning all these dyads because people think, I have weight because I have a thyroid issue. Maybe, or maybe the thyroid is downstream of all these other things. And that's why you need functional testing to analyze. When someone comes to me and they're like, I have a thyroid issue. It's like, okay, there's all these other things that are maybe causal to the thyroid issue. So we can check thyroid, but we're going to check all these other tests. And that's why I'm a huge fan of testing, as opposed to just thinking it's just thyroid. So that's the brain and hormones. As you can tell, just one pillar is this massive exploration out of all the things. So then the second pillar is bowel and digestion. How well you chew, how well you poo, how well you digest. A lot of people ask, well, what's the best supplement for weight loss? My response is probably chewing. That's probably the best supplement out there, is chewing, meaning properly absorbing the nutrients you are already taking, whether it's food or supplements. Obviously, you wouldn't really, with rare exception, you wouldn't chew your supplements. But the fact that you're improving your digestion to absorb what you need. And then if you're not eliminating, so you've got to get that fixed. So, the rhetorical question is, how long would you live in a house with a toilet that couldn't flush? And the answer is not very long.
That's a good one.
You've got to be able to eject all the your body's trying to get rid of that stuff. And if you don't, then they sit in the bowel, particularly if you have a leaky gut. It can the toxins or the bacterial exudates or the other things that your body's trying to get rid of can go back into the bloodstream and overwhelm the liver. So that's bowel and digestion. And there's amazing stool tests out there that are available. There's four major competing types of stool testing: CDSA, GI Map, GI Effects, and GI 360. There's a couple other ones, but those are the four major legit ones that functional medicine practitioners have been using like forever. And it's important to get your bowel actually tested properly for hidden infections. You know, are you actually absorbing your nutrients? Like, is your gallbladder working properly? You can check the immune system lining, the inside lining of the gut, inflammatory markers, etc. So that's the gut. Pillar number 3 is the physical body, and I include genetics. And the reason why I include genetics in the physical body is because of twins. Why do twins have the same bodies? Because they have the identical genetics. So that's how I camp genetics into this pillar system. So it's about old injuries, untreated injuries, acute injuries, spinal misalignments, chronic. You can create now. How does poor posture? Oh, gee, that's a surprise. A chiropractor's talking about poor posture. Gee, that's a shocker. How does that possibly relate to weight? Very easily. When you have chronically misaligned joints, you do two things. One is you create pockets of inflammation, because like you take your finger and you just twist it a little bit and keep it there. It's going to start, your joints are going to start to hurt and you're going to get inflamed and all the rest of it. Now you can have joint misalignment and not feel pain, but still have the little wells of inflammation. Plus they're sending neurological distress signals up to the brain because you have a misaligned joint. You've got nerves in those joints that are signaling that we got a misaligned joint here. This is in stress. And what happens is you trigger cortisol, you trigger the sympathetic nervous system and cortisol and adrenals and all the rest of it. So misaligned joints contribute by affecting the nervous system and the hormone system, as well as the inflammatory system. Then you've got, and we'll talk about genetics in a separate talk. It's a whole Pandora's box there. The fourth pillar is burst, which is the only B word I can find for movement. So it's movement and exercise. Now, exercise can be a trigger word for a lot of people listening. It can be so I don't actually like to use the word exercise. I like to use the word movement. And the burst has to do with diversity of movement, frequency, recovery time. One of the biggest things people miss. Recovery time. I'm a big fan of high intensity interval training, but the key word there is interval, not just 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off, which is, I have a whole separate talk on my website that describes how that type of research is just as arbitrary as the jog for 40 minutes 3 times a week. There's principles behind proper exercise that, as opposed to just a rigid dogmatic set of 20 seconds on, 20 seconds off, or whatever it is these days. Movement is critical, but people can either underdo or overdo, or simply not recover, which is a variation of overdo. The fifth pillar is biotoxins. And so whether it's heavy metals or petrochemicals or solvents or insecticides or pesticides or toxic estrogens that are being like heated plastics or makeups or other things, birth control pill metabolites that are in the water supply, that, you know, that's kind of a scary thought. Then the 6 pillars, bionutrients, which is nutrition, diet, everything from proteins and vitamins and minerals and fats and things like that. But it's also sunlight and oxygen, because we literally metabolize those as well. And 7th pillar is breakfast and routines. Now, I can already hear people saying, but wait, I thought for fat loss, I'm supposed to skip breakfast. No. What happens with intermittent fasting, I'm a fan of intermittent fasting, but I'm not a fan of skipping breakfast. I'd rather people skip dinner. And the reason why is because when you skip breakfast, your cortisol levels keep going up. And because it's called break the fast, your body secretes cortisol to keep blood sugar stable in your body so that your brain stays alive. And if you don't eat, then your cortisol keeps going up. So I know a lot of people are endorsing skipping breakfast, but most of those people are, you know, it's a bit of a caricature, but most of them are 20s to 40s, financially solvent tech entrepreneur males, not burned out, adrenal fatigue, thyroid laden issued women. You know, I don't, and that's the majority of my client base is mompreneurs.
Mhm.
And I do not endorse skipping breakfast. You want to intermittent fast? Great. Skip dinner, you know, or have a way earlier dinner, you know? So uh, I know that may be controversial, but I'm okay with that. So the
Well, it's
other
good to
thing about
get
it,
multiple opinions, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Like,
The other thing about the seventh pillar is routines. I saw the sickest group of clients as a client base were night shift nurses. They had
interesting.
the sickest by far of anyone I've ever worked with as a group of people were night shift nurses. And the biggest defining factor with them was their routines were all over the place. They had no evening routine because they were, you know, they were being put to human Tetris with their schedules, night shift, day shift, mid shift, whatever. So routines, breakfast and evening are absolutely critical.
Yeah. And
And
as
then,
I worked the night shift for like 6 years while I was in my nurse practitioner program. So I could tell you, you're flipping from days to nights and it is stressful.
absolutely.
I'm so happy to be on a day schedule. So I'm not surprised by that, but very interesting that, yeah.
Yeah, and you can see why like they get the 10 causes of weight loss just within routine, because if you're out of routine, you're comfort eating food from all the stress, you're eating sugar and coffee, it's in order to get quick hits of energy. You're not sleeping, which is where you burn most of your fat. Or if you are, it's not really deep sleep, or it's interrupted sleep. You know, all of these can trigger a weight gain, like brain and hormones. We already talked about the weight gain there. Bowel and digestion, if you're not absorbing your nutrients properly, you're not absorbing the nutrients to properly burn fat and get rid of inflammation, or worse, if you're not eliminating, you're creating more inflammation. The physical body and genetics, and there's a whole thing on, we talked about genetics before, about how you can be genetically predisposed uh, to inflammatory processes or excess toxic overload. And then the injuries creating inflammation. And not only that, but they can also prevent you from moving properly to help boost your metabolism to burn fat. Exercise, people can over exercise and put on weight, which is what we talked about before, or they can under exercise and not build up their metabolism to burn their weight, particularly if they've got what was the average, like 29 pounds was gained on average for during COVID or something like that. Toxins, like if you have toxic exposure, you're gumming up your ability to, we talked about it, you know, affecting the thyroid, for example, but toxins can also affect your mitochondria and affect your ability to burn fat and also trigger their own inflammation. If you're not eating the proper nutrients, then you're not having all the vitamins, minerals, and cofactors and so forth to use to help your mitochondria to burn fat and detox inflammation. We already talked about what happens with the night shift nurses. And then, or anyone who has an off kilter morning and evening routine. Then we have bothers, which is the stressors. And so stress will absolutely help put on weight. One, because you're comfort eating, you're eating sugar, you're altering your hormone system, you're hurting your sleep. And now it sounds like, well, wait a minute, doc, your sounds like all the pillars are related to all the other pillars. Correct. This is why making framework models is tough, because everything is connected to everything. And this is kind of the current representation that I got on how can we splice out a multifactorial issue into something teachable. I know one guy, he had 37 causes for disease. And I'm like, dude, no one is going to learn 37 things. Nobody. And like, I'm smart and I won't even bother to try to memorize a 37 thing. Like it's crazy. So 10 seem to be the most largest logical number that everyone can kind of keep in there. 12 is probably the top, because you've got 12 things on a clock. 12 is kind of a historical number, etc. But 10 people can handle. And then they're subdivided into their different, you know, physical, biochemical, mental, emotional, brain in the middle. So stressors can affect whether it's, you know, emotional stress, cultural stress, work stress, financial stress, relationship stress, marital stress, whatever it is. A clutter can even be a stressor. Watching the news can be a stressor. Bugs is the ninth pillar, bugs and hidden infections and mold. Now, those can absolutely put on weight, because hidden infections in the gut, particularly, will eat your nutrients on your behalf, excrete their own toxins, and create more inflammation and issues, gnaw on the organs in question. can create molecular mimicry or autoimmune and contribute to leaky gut. So hidden infections can absolutely affect weight. Mold, I would put in this category as well. Mold, damages the mitochondria, which is the main thing that burns fuel, burns fat for fuel. And people may wonder, why are bugs not in the bowel? Because of mold. I was in New Zealand for a while, and there's mold central over there, with little islands surrounded by water on all four sides. Mm-hmm. And bugs are not, mold does not necessarily be in the gut. You can inhale it. And also, I put in the mental emotional, because people who are unwell from infections affects their thinking. The 10th pillar is bedtime, and that's sleep. So quality, duration, consistency, and depth. And I was a severe insomniac for 12 years, to the point where it stunted my growth based on my hand size and shoe size and the height of my father. I should be 4 inches taller than what I am today. And I've meaningful interactions with sleep, and it's reversing that to now that I sleep normally. And it's one of the most important things I work with people on. So even though sleep is, for teaching purposes, pillar number 10, it's almost never priority 10 when I work with someone individually. So these things are arranged for teaching purposes 1 through 10. Everyone's order of priority is different. In fact, when I work with clients individually, I run them through a very, very detailed survey of each individual pillar to identify quickly and efficiently what pillars are crumbling and what priority should we be working on, and what clusters of pillars should we be working on at the same time, to help people feel and get better as quickly as possible. And then we use lab testing to figure out in detail what's going on under the hood. So just to kind of summarize for the purposes of this summit, if people understand these 10 pillars: brain, bowel, body, first biotoxins, bionutrients, breakfast, fathers, bugs, and bedtime, you will now be able to hear what every other person is contributing, and where to put what pillar or pillars their information slots into. So now you can step back and look at the entire playing field of, okay, this person is talking about this and this person's talking just about this person's talking about 3 or 4 of these, this person's talking about, no, this one way over here that no one else is talking about, which sounds really fascinating. And then you can actually look at the whole thing and have a proper evaluation of, where am I? Right. What pillars do I need to focus on? They all sound really great, and they are, but which ones to focus on? I mean, I'm biased. I think people should get an evaluation of all 10 at once, and then use lab testing to figure out what is really deeply going on at a biochemical level, while working on all the lifestyle things from the pillar level simultaneously.
Right. So what are the best tests to get, or how do they go about testing?
So the best tests are, so I'm going to give the 10 most, in my opinion, the 10 most important tests from a general viewpoint on functional testing. There's over 100. I'm just going to talk about the top 10 that people will almost certainly hear about. And so they can know what's going on. So these are the 3 main hormone tests you will find in functional medicine. Number 1 is an adrenal test called an adrenal stress index, or an adrenal stress profile, or whatever. It's a 4 to 6 spot saliva test, maybe 5 depending on the company. And it checks for your cortisol in a rhythm throughout the day. So how your cortisol rises and falls throughout the day, and if it's out of rhythm, or if it's too much or too little. Then there's what's called Dutch hormones. It's a very, very popular test because it looks at, there's several types of Dutch hormones. I just run the Dutch Plus, but that's the one that combines the adrenal hormones plus testosterone, 7 types of estrogens, progesterone metabolites, some extra things with adrenals, as well as checking melatonin. A couple other things as well, but that's the main things that it does, is it checks all the sex hormones and the stress hormones in a very complete and meaningful way. Thyroid is separate. Thyroid is another test, and I encourage people to not just run and get a TSH test. There's way more to thyroid than just TSH. There's free T3, free T4, different types of antibodies, and reverse T3. And if you understand the 3 different types of hormone tests, these are the 3 ones that you will come across most frequently in a functional medicine practice: adrenals, Dutch, thyroid. Obviously, there's some others, but these are three main ones. The next ones are gut testing. So gut testing, there are four major tests that are going on. One is a stool test. And I've already mentioned the big heavy hitters, the CDSA, GI MAP, GI 360, GI effects. They all have their pluses and minuses, but they're all good. Some are better suited for certain situations over others. This is not a gut testing training call. That's a whole separate chat. But as long as your clinician is running one of those four, then you're at least getting a very legitimate test in functional medicine. I don't. There's other popular tests out there that seem in popular press that I do not trust, and I don't know a single full-time legit functional medicine practitioner actually uses them. But just stick to those four. Then there's the SIBO test. That's become very, very popular nowadays. That's a breath test, and it's checking for hydrogen and methane if you've got small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Then the fourth type of test is food sensitivities and intolerances. There's a lot of different labs that do this. There's Cyrex, there's Vibrant America, there's LCAT, Genova has their own set. Most of these major labs that functional medicine practitioners use have their own food sensitivities and intolerance tests. I'm not going to go into which one's better than the other. This is not a food sensitivity training call, but just so people know, there's different companies that all check in slightly different ways for slightly different things, but it is a category. My preference is that if people were to pick between food sensitivity and gut testing, I would pick the gut testing first, because if this is my arm, this is my finger, if I poke my arm, whatever, but if I have an open wound on my arm and I poke it, do I have a finger allergy or do I have an open wound on my arm? It's an open wound. So if I've got a leaky gut, intestinal permeability, irritated, inflamed gut, and some food comes in there and just does that, is it the food's fault? Really? Or is it the gut that needs the helping? Now, there are genuine, real, legitimate, permanent food sensitivities, intolerances, etc. But my experience is that in most cases, huge swaths of that can be resolved with dealing with the gut first. And then if there's anything left over, then you can run the food sensitivity stuff. So it's fine to run them together. It's fine. It's just stylistic. Practitioners have different philosophies about how to run things. I think the gut has a higher priority than the actual food sensitivities. My personal opinion, free to debate that. The next major one is mitochondria, brain, and liver testing. This is the organics comprehensive profile, or ion panel, or OAT testing. This is one of my favorite tests. This is the one that I've specialized in. And I can read all those other ones, but very well. But this one I've really gone deep into with studying the advanced mitochondria, brain, and liver tests. And this is where you would look at mitochondria function, neurotransmitter metabolites, brain inflammation, free radicals, liver detox, fatty acids, amino acids, key heavy metals, key minerals, key fat-soluble vitamins, inflammatory markers. Like it's over 150 metabolites on the advanced mitochondria, brain, and liver test. I've got 2 videos on my YouTube channel, one explaining the whole test as an overview, which I did for the mitochondria summit, and then another one just devoted to the fatty acid portion, because that's kind of the most mysterious portion to most practitioners, especially me, before I try to decode it. This one, I love this one because there's so much information here. Especially relates to fat burning, because you burn fat in the mitochondria. That's where you burn it. And also, if you're concerned about liver and detox and all the rest of it, then it's in this test as well. Lastly, there's some other kind of more ancillary tests that are less frequently done. One are just kind of a swath of blood tests like glucose and kidneys and other liver markers and iron markers and all that. The main things that people should be looking for are checking, if they're concerned about fat, is that checking their iron, checking their glucose metabolism. You know, those are really important things to be checking for as well. Methylation is a bit more obscure. That's a harder, rarer test to run. It's reserved for when the other tests have not revealed things. They haven't revealed things going on that should have that you expect to be there, but actually weren't. So you may just come across this. Methylation is a very difficult topic. But there is an actual blood test out there that really checks the whole pathway. And then lastly, which we'll talk about separately, is genetics. There's an entire field of genetics, and that can be specifically catered to weight loss, whether it's looking at inflammatory genetics clusters. There's genetics testing now to find your ideal diet. Are you better suited as a keto, a paleo, a Mediterranean, or high carb? That test exists now. Looking at trigger foods, genetic vulnerability specific foods, vitamin D absorption, critical, because vitamin D drops inflammation, and the ability to absorb vitamin D is the missing link most people miss. Mm-hmm. And then of course, immunity, that's kind of important in these play times. And,
right. And just vitamin D deficiency is very, very common. When I was following breast cancer patients, we routinely drew those levels, and even in sunny California, they were, I would say more than half of them had a vitamin D deficiency.
And this test would explain why. It's because genetically there's 8 major genes that go from sunlight to vitamin D3 in the blood. There's 8 genes between that sunlight and your vitamin D just in the blood. And if you've got a meaningful number of variations in those 8 major genes, then your ability to convert sunlight to vitamin D is inhibited. And then even when it's in the blood, then you've got another journey of actually getting the vitamin D from the blood into the cells. And that's where the vitamin D receptors come in. We'll talk more about that in the genetics chat, but vitamin D is a lot more complicated than just merely hanging out in the sun. It's way more complicated. And then I think the last thing for the roadmap is just kind of putting it all together. So this is the entire cycle in one page. And it's busy, but the 10 pillars of health through bad lifestyle choices or bad circumstances. Genes are all these green arrows. So bad lifestyle choices or circumstances, you will then provoke whatever genetic weaknesses you have. Bad diet, not sleeping, not exercising, not evacuating your bowels regularly over years, hormone dysregulation, skipping breakfast, or having sugar for breakfast, high stress, hidden infections, etc. They will then expose the genetic weaknesses you have, which will then create one or more of the 4 main body responses: inflammation, blood sugar dysregulation, tissue breakdown, and free radicals. Chronic adaptation for adaptive responses leads to damaging one or more of the 3 main organ systems. Your hormone systems gets disrupted, or your gut system gets disrupted, or your liver detox system gets disrupted. Chronic breakdown of these 3 symptoms leads to symptoms like weight gain, fatigue, low mood, and cravings, insomnia, pain, hot flushes, etc. If you have symptoms, then you want to cope with bad lifestyle choices, which then triggers adaptive responses, more damage, more symptoms, more coping, more damage, more adaptation, more damage, etc. And round it goes. Mm-hmm. So a really good functional medicine practitioner does 3 things. Number 1, analyzes the lifestyle choices and circumstances and try to reverse that at the root. Number 2, they analyze the genetics to blockade progression into these adaptive responses. And number 3, they use functional testing, adrenal, thyroid, sex hormones, liver, mitochondria, gut, etc., to identify how are you adapting and what organ systems have been damaged. And from those 3 inputs, you create a customized lifestyle, diet, nutrition program with supervision for implementation to then reverse this entire process. So when people are going through this summit, they now have the full roadmap. And I encourage people to like study this slide. This is like 20 years of my life on one slide. That you now have the full roadmap, and you can see where all the other contributors to the summit are meaningfully contributing to pieces, sections, portions of this entire cycle. Everyone's an individual. Everyone's solutions do work, but they don't all work for everybody. And now you can understand why. Mm-hmm. And now everything you've ever have learned about natural health, everything you ever are learning, and everything you ever will learn, you now have the roadmap to put all of that information into one coherent model so that you don't get lost or overwhelmed in your next steps.
Right. This is so good. And um, I just love what you set up. And, it's a little longer, everybody. Most of the interviews will be shorter, but I think this is important to set the structure so you can really categorize it and know that, as humans, one thing impacts another. And it makes sense that all those little categories are interrelated. So, just like with the computer, I was on a program and they changed code in one section and it created problems with other parts of the code somewhere else. So,
Right.
we're like really highly sophisticated computers, and everything interrelates. So that's such a great overview. And you have a lovely free gift available for the audience.
Mhm.
And here's the link, and it will also be in the show notes. Tell us a little bit. Is this just a summary of what you shared with us today in this
So
your biohacking?
so the biohacking ebook has a lot more detail on each individual pillar, including practical. People ask, well, what can I do now? And it sounds a bit self-referential, but go get the ebook, and there's specific things that the top most common things that I see people can do right away in each pillar. As I've seen just working with clients over all these years, it's it's like, what are the common things that I see in each pillar that in general almost everyone can implement. Of course, when we get into working with people individually, it gets real granular for what people not only should do within each pillar, but which pillar should look at, or sets of pillars look at first. And then, of course, the functional testing is individualized. And there's more detail on the different types of functional testing in the ebook as well, if you want some more understanding of what's in there. Also, there's an opportunity for people, if they want to chat with me individually. There's at this point in recording, at the time of this recording, I'm still available for qualified candidates to work with me if they just, the link's in the back of the book, or it's on my website on the contact page.
Okay, that is so great. And, just looking at that framework, I certainly had very many pillars that were worked on throughout my journey. And I think that's why I'm still not regaining weight almost 3 years out, because in the past I only fixed one thing and it was not sustainable. So I think it's worthwhile to take a look and look at the whole thing. Um, so thank you so much. This is so great. And I'm glad I get to talk to you again about genetics. So keep watching the summit, everybody. Check your email for links. We'll have Dr. Sam Shea back again for a deeper dive into genetics. So thank you so much. And we'll see
Thank you.
you next time.